Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. So what you're watching is called What's Left. I'm your host, Larry Erickson, welcoming you not only to the show, but to fall, as it turns out. And for about the next half hour, I'm going to be talking about some things that I think are worthy of your attention, so I hope you'll stick with us for that time. As always, if you have any reactions to the show, you can send them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating@aol.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. And the URL will be here a few times during the show. And you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do it that way. If you do send me email, just two things as always. Include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is about the show, it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm just lousy at answering email. So with that, let's get to it. I do have some good news to start this week. I always like to do that when I can. But for this first one, I have to give the background first. I've talked before about civil asset forfeiture, a practice under which police can seize property when they merely suspect it's been used in or was bought with the gains from some illegal activity, and they can keep that property even if the owner of it is never convicted of or even charged with a crime. The practice has become controversial over the past several years, and nearly half of all states have passed some form of asset forfeiture reform in the wake of public pressure, driven at least in part by media investigations that revealed the abuses in the program and the disproportionate impact on poor people and people of color. As a result of that pushback, in January 2015, then Attorney General Eric Holder said that he was mostly putting an end to a program called equitable sharing. This is one under which the feds could adopt a seizure taken out by state police and then give 80% of the value back to that police department, which was in effect nothing more than a way for those cops to avoid more restrictive state laws on asset seizure. That gain turned sour this year in July when Attorney General, I swear I am not a racist, Jeff Sessions, said that he was reinstituting equitable sharing. Which brings us finally to the good news. In one of those weird moments of joint concern, Goppers focused on property rights and liberals and progressives focused on the Fourth Amendment and privacy concerns, joined together to offer amendments to the massive appropriations bill moving through Congress in order to restrict civil asset forfeiture and to actually undo the move that Sessions made about equitable sharing. On September 5th, the House of Representatives unanimously passed a bill to alter so-called restructuring laws. These are laws under which the IRS could seize the bank accounts of businesses, even small businesses, that too frequently, in their view, made deposits or withdrawals of less than $10,000. That was under the assumption that the only reason to do that was to hide criminal activity. Again, no actual evidence was required, and the feds could keep whatever money they seized. The other thing is on good news is that on September 12th, the House of Representatives passed by voice vote a measure to block Sessions' rollback of equitable sharing and to lock that rollback into place as law. Now remember things, these are not committee votes. This is the entire House of Representatives doing this. These provisions still have to get through the Senate as part of these appropriations bills, but opposition to civil asset forfeiture lives there as well. So while it's not a sure thing, it is within the range of possibility, and that surely is good news. Next up, we've also got some good news on matters related to immigration. For one thing, on September 13th, Teamsters Joint Council 16, this is an umbrella group of 27 unions representing 120,000 workers, mostly around New York City and some in Puerto Rico. Teamsters Joint Council 16 passed a resolution declaring itself a sanctuary union. It will not assist federal immigration agents in deporting its members and will proactively provide trainings, legal assistance, and organizing to support immigrant Teamsters. This followed the deportation of Eber Garcias Vasquez, who had been working as a Teamster for 26 years and was deported despite having no criminal record, reporting in once a year regarding his requests for asylum and doing everything else that he was supposed to do. So much for the bad hombres bull, as even some ICE agents are actually admitting. They say the practice is now to arrest and deport people because they can, and not because those people are a danger. And this is going on even as Jeff Sessions foams at the mouth about how sanctuary cities put us all in danger from predators because, quoting, a sanctuary city is a trafficker, smuggler, or gang member's best friend. While he repeatedly lies about a non-existent rise in violent crime, which actually is at its lowest levels in some decades. But if Jeffykins is that upset about sanctuary cities, he must be absolutely apoplectic about California, which on September 16th made itself a sanctuary state. Although the bill as passed was not as strong as the one that was introduced originally, it is still the most wide-ranging such bill in the United States. And if that didn't make him pop a few blood vessels, maybe this one did. On September 15th, a federal judge in Chicago issued a nationwide injunction against TheRump's attempt to punish sanctuary cities by withholding funds for public safety programs. District Judge Harry Leinenweber found that penalizing cities for protecting undocumented immigrants was unlawful and unconstitutional, and that Sessions did not have the authority to put those kind of conditions on the program. The judge made the ruling national, he said, because there is no reason, I'm quoting the judge, there's no reason to think that the legal issues present in this case are restricted to Chicago or that the statutory authority given the Attorney General would differ in another jurisdiction. That decision follows one in California in April, which is also about an attempt to end sanctuary cities, and a related one in Texas in July. That one addressed a Texas law that allowed police to inquire about a person's immigration status even during routine interactions. In both those cases, as in this new one out of Chicago, immigrant rights prevailed. Which actually only makes sense, not only legally and morally, but logically. Police around the country often support sanctuary cities because that allows immigrants to report crime without fear of retaliation or deportation, which, contrary to the bigoted xenophobic frothings of such as Jeff, I am not a racist Sessions, actually makes those cities safer. And that good news is actually extra nice to have because we actually also have some good news, not good news, regarding TheRump's bigoted attempts to ban refugees and most Muslims from entering the United States. Back in June, the Supreme Court agreed to take up the issue of those attempts and said that while the case was under consideration, it would partially reinstate the ban. Partially here meaning that the ban would only apply to people without, quote, a credible claim of a bona fide relationship with a person or entity in the United States. The question ever since has been what that phrase actually means in practice. TheRump's administration, to no one's surprise, interpreted it very narrowly. It said that only what amounts to little more than the immediate family of American residents could enter, and that refugees were not covered because a connection to a refugee resettlement agency was not a bona fide relationship. Now, on September 7th, a panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a lower court ruling rejecting both of those contentions. It expanded family connections to include grandparents, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, and cousins, as well as saying that, yes, a connection to a refugee agency is a bona fide relationship. Now, that would appear to be good news, but the not good news here is that on September 12th, the Supreme Court, without any noted dissents, blocked the part of the ruling relating to refugees from going into effect, leaving the 24,000 refugees affected by the ban in an ever-stretching legal limbo, with oral arguments not until October 10th and a decision not until who knows how long after that. On the other hand, there is some good news within the not good news. The administration did not even challenge the other part of the Ninth Circuit ruling, the part that smacked down the White House's restrictive definition of what constituted an immigrant having a relationship with someone already in the U.S. So that part of the ruling stands. And so, yes, that is something you could call good news amid the not good news. And it's always nice to have some good news, because we have a bunch of not good news, at least we could call it that, on a somewhat different, actually a very different front. On September 18th, Secretary of War James Mattis said that more than 3,000 more U.S. troops are going to Afghanistan. He'd already said 2 weeks ago that more would be going, but he hadn't said how many. This actually brings the total of U.S. troops in Afghanistan to at least 14,000. This comes in the wake of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's statement on August 22nd that, quoting, "This entire effort was intended to put pressure on the Taliban, to have the Taliban understand that you will not win a battlefield victory. We may not win one, but neither will you." Which, if it means anything, it means a literally unending war stretching unknown years into the future of military stalemate. And so what had been Bush's war and became Obama's war is now undeniably TheRump's war. And nothing changes except the length of the list of the dead. And speaking of wars, oh yeah, there's still one in Syria, isn't there? Deir ez-Zor is the largest city in eastern Syria. It had been under siege from Daesh, or ISIS, but I prefer the insulting name Daesh. Been under siege from Daesh, but while the siege had been broken on behalf of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad by Iranian forces backed with Russian air cover, fighting around the area, which is still a Daesh stronghold, remains and goes on and continues. And it continues on more than one front. U.S. forces and its allied militias are also closing in on Deir ez-Zor from the other side, the eastern side of the Euphrates River, bringing Russian and Russian-backed forces on the west side of the river and U.S.-backed SDF, as it's called, Syrian Democratic Forces on the eastern side of the river into uncomfortably close proximity. September 16th, the SDF, which is mostly Kurdish, said its positions had been attacked by Syrian or Russian aircraft, injuring 6. There were also American troops in the area. They were there, but none of them were hurt. On September 18th, the SDF said that any further attempts to advance on the eastern shore of the Euphrates would be met with retaliation. Then on September 21st, Russia claimed that its forces had twice come under attack, mortar attacks from the SDF forces, and threatened that further attacks, quote, will be immediately suppressed with all military means. Now, of course, the Russians deny any involvement in the September 16th attacks, and the SDF denies that there have been any mortar attacks. All this has led to a highly unusual face-to-face meeting between high-ranking Russian and American military officers to try to keep this from getting completely out of control. But in any event, the tensions will remain and very likely increase. Because for one thing, political credit for defeating ISIS in this area is at stake. But the underlying and even more important issue is the one of ultimate influence in and control of eastern and northern Syria, with Assad wanting it all back under his direct noxious control, and the Syrian Kurds unwilling to give up the relative autonomy that they have gained as a result of the civil war, a fact indicated by the fact that they are holding elections as part of a plan to set up a federal system in Syria. So frankly, very bluntly, it's hard to see how direct U.S.-Russian conflict can be avoided forever, unless the two were to agree that Assad and Kurds, just going to let them fight it out for control of eastern and northern Syria, let them fight it out on their own, which isn't a solution for anyone, of course, except for the Russian and American soldiers who would not be killed. And this solution probably wouldn't work anyway, because Turkey is sending troops into Idlib, supposedly as a part of a de-escalation agreement about Syria, for Syria, but really about suppressing Kurdish forces who Turkey regards as terrorists, amid fears that any autonomy for Syrian Kurds would increase calls for Turkish Kurds to have the same right. So let's see, Afghanistan, Syria, and, Iraq. Even as our national traditional amnesia mixes with our short attention span, there is still fighting in Iraq. U.S. and coalition, quote-unquote coalition, airstrikes continue in Iraq, including one along the Syria-Iraq border in western Al-Anbar province. That was on September 18th, and it killed at least, according to a journalistic monitoring group, it killed at least 6 civilians and wounded at least 24 more. Meanwhile, the Iraq military says it is beginning an offensive to retake Hawija, one of 2 remaining bastions of the Islamic State in Iraq. And this is happening even as ISIS turns more and more to suicide attacks, including one on September 15th that killed more than 80 people in an attack on a restaurant frequented by Shia Muslim pilgrims in Nasiriyah in southern Iran. Meanwhile, the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq is planning on a September 25th referendum, non-binding referendum on independence. A move which has gotten opposition from multiple fronts, each for their own reasons. The central government in Baghdad just doesn't like the idea of independence. To be fair, central governments never do. But it's also because any such state would wind up in possession of some of what are now Iraq's oil fields. Iran and Turkey fear this, each because they fear it could promote ideas of autonomy or even independence among their own Kurdish populations. The U.S. Says it fears that it would hurt the re-election chances of Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. And it's even been opposed by UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres, who says it will distract from the fight against ISIS. It's to the point where Turkey, Iran, and Iraq have jointly agreed to consider unspecified countermeasures against Kurdish northern Iraq over the referendum. The upshot is that as I prepare this, on September 18th, Iraqi Supreme Court ordered the suspension of all preparation for the referendum, quote, until it examines the complaints it has received over this plebiscite being unconstitutional. Which leaves Masoud Barzani, who is the president of the Kurdish regional government, in what one analyst called a very delicate position politically, because if he's going to back down on having this referendum, he needs to get something in return. The question is what that could be beyond vague assurances of the sort that the U.S., for one, has given the Kurds for years about how we really do support greater Kurdish autonomy, just not now. Frankly, I don't think those kind of assurances will be good enough. By the time you see this, September 25th will likely have come and gone, so I'll have to revisit this next week, if only briefly, if only to discuss whether or not the referendum actually took place. And one last quick reminder on this not good news, because there are still wars front. On September 12th, Human Rights Watch charged the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen of war crimes, with airstrikes on civilian targets carried out deliberately or recklessly in violation of international law. The group called on the UN to immediately return the coalition to its annual list of shame for violations against children in armed combat. And as I pointed out back in July, the U.S. is directly complicit in these war crimes, which Saudi Arabia would be unable to carry out were it not for U.S. assistance. And so, to slightly paraphrase Mick Softly, and the wars drag on. Time for a break. And here we are back. All right, let's try to lighten things up a little bit, with one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. First up among our nominees is former Milwaukee sheriff and man who wears a hat to keep his brains in, David Clark, who has been given 100 days to revise his master's thesis after he was found to have failed to properly attribute sources, that is, he had plagiarized at least 47 times. The dean of the school said he didn't think it was intentional deception, which is maybe true. It could have been plain old incompetence. Besides, intentional deception requires a degree of cleverness and subtlety which appears to escape this bozo. All right, next up is that generic GOP senator, because he's an old white man, Chuck Grassley of Iowa. Speaking to a group of Iowa reporters on September 20th, Grassley referred to the catastrophically bad Graham-Cassidy health care destruction bill that the Goppers are desperately trying to get through the Senate. He said that, and I'm quoting, "You know, I could maybe give you 10 reasons why this bill shouldn't be considered. But Republicans campaign on this so often that you have a responsibility to carry out what you said in the campaign. That's as much of a reason as the substance of the bill." So, yeah, in other words, it shouldn't even be considered. At least 10 reasons why it shouldn't even be considered. But we said it in the campaign, so what are you going to do? You know, because no politician has ever broken a campaign promise. And so it's actually better to condemn people to premature death for lack of access to adequate health care than it is to admit that we screwed up. Now, I could ascribe that to sheer cold-blooded inhumanity, but I'm feeling kind for some reason, so I'm just going to chalk it up to senility. But our winner this week has no excuses at all for being an evil clown. So winner of the Big Red Nose this week is Air Force Chaplain Captain Sonny Hernandez, who ministers to thousands of men and women at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. On September 12th, he posted an article to a right-wing website saying that, and I'm quoting him here, "Christian service members who openly profess and support the rights of Muslims, Buddhists, and all other anti-Christian worldviews to practice their religions because the language in the Constitution permits are grossly in error and deceived. And what's more, such counterfeit Christians, as he called them, ultimately serve Satan." And I hear the church lady in my head when I... In other words, actually believing in freedom of religion, actually upholding your oath, which he also took to support the Constitution, makes you a devil worshiper. Sonny Hernandez, religious bigot, fanatic, and evil clown. By the way, as a footnote to that, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation says that the number of complaints it has received from servicemen and servicewomen in the Army, Air Force, Marines, and the other branches of the military services have more than doubled since TheRump's election. All right, last up for this week. It's one of our occasional features around here. It's called The Little Thing, and this is where something in a story or an article just didn't get the reaction that I thought it should, didn't get the notice that I think it deserves. So here's the thing. As Hurricane Irma approached Florida, there were, not surprisingly, a lot of people trying to get out of the state. One person, Lee Dow, was looking for a flight online, but instead of the fares she expected for last-minute flyers, flights for about $400 to $500 one way, the prices were running to $1,700 one way. When she found a Delta flight on Expedia for over $3,200, she got mad enough to tweet about it, a tweet which went viral, sparking outrage to a degree where two U.S. senators, Richard Blumenthal and Ed Markey, and Representative Charlie Crist, they wrote letters to Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao asking her to look into reports of price gouging. Well, after a lot of harumphing and fuming and fussing, Delta got Lee Dow on a flight for $315. The Expedia price was chalked up to some kind of screw up, and some airlines capped their one-way fares out of Florida, and some others, such as JetBlue, actually cut their fares to $99. Now, George Obika, the founder of airfarewatchdog.com, chalked up the increases to standard industry practice and dismissed the notion that airlines were taking advantage of the emergency, saying, quote, "I don't think airlines would be callous or stupid enough to be consciously jacking up rates." Sure, he said, some are high, but last-minute fares are often more expensive in general. And in fact, airline data by Hopper, which is a flight search engine, showed that the price hikes that took place the week before the storm for flights out of Florida were similar to those from 2 weeks before that. Okay, so all's well and no price gouging, right? Except for the little thing, the thing I didn't hear any comment on, even though this really should have provoked it. Last-minute fares are more expensive. Yes, we know that. But what does that mean? It means it's standard operating procedure for airlines to rip off passengers who need a flight last minute for whatever reason. It's standard operating practice to jack up the price when people are in a take it or leave it situation. This has nothing to do with cost. Certainly the cost to the airline of the last passenger to book a flight is no greater than the cost to the airline of the first passenger to book a flight. In fact, having the plane fuller is to the airline's advantage. There is no economic necessity whatsoever for last-minute fares to be so much more expensive. Except, that is, for the necessity of the logic of capitalism, the logic of maximize profit any way you can, the necessity of get more. And if you can take advantage of someone's situation to do that, you not only can, you must by that logic. The fact that last-minute walk-up passengers are, for the most part, business flyers trying to close a deal or make a meeting or whatever, and who are working on expense accounts, none of that changes any of that. I've said before that it's not profit, it's the love of profit. It's where profit is made out to be the goal of economic activity, not the means of driving it. The love of profit, when the love of profit is the moving force, the love of profit is the moving force behind economic inequality and all of the poverty, homelessness, hunger, and the rest that goes along with that. And the fact that airlines so casually taking advantage of last-minute flyers as a normal part of doing business, and the fact that that provokes so little response, is proof of how wound into our psyches that destructive love of profit actually is. All right, that's it for this week. Okay, we're going to wrap up there. We have more to talk about. Of course, we'll be back next week with some new and different stuff, and I hope you'll be back with us then. In the meantime, remember, whoviating@AOL.com if you want to have any reactions. So for now, I'll just wish you happy fall. Have the best week you possibly can. As always, peace.